Hi, I'm Robert Lundy with the American Anglican Council, and I'm here with our Chief Operating Officer, the Reverend Canon Phil Ashe. Hey, Phil.
Hi, Robert.
And we're doing something a little bit different today. Usually, Canon Ashe writes an article for our weekly email update, and the subject we're going to talk about today is so, it's complicated, that we thought maybe a video format would work better for this. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Phil, let's talk about, first of all, what happened with the Church of Christ Church Savannah in Savannah, Georgia, and why are we talking about it, and what does it matter?
Well, Robert, we're talking about Christ Church Savannah today because they just received an opinion from the highest court in Georgia, the Georgia State Supreme Court, that the Episcopal Church has the right to take their property, their buildings. Last Sunday they had their last service in the building, and it was a very bittersweet service, but amidst all the tears, a wonderful spirit of rejoicing and moving forward into the new temporary home they have at the Independent Presbyterian Church, also in downtown Savannah. This is a major event in the life of Christ Church and in the churches in Savannah, because Christ Church Savannah was founded before either the state of Georgia or the Diocese of Georgia or even the Episcopal Church existed. The land for it came from a royal grant from the Crown of England. Among the initial pastors of that church were George Whitefield and John Wesley. The pulpit at Christ Church Savannah, used by both of them. So this is an historic landmark, and really for the Orthodox cause among Anglicans was a very sad defeat at the legal level.
And I mean, no offense to Christ Church Savannah, but there are hundreds of lawsuits going on. Specifically within Christian on Christian sort of lawsuits. What makes theirs so special?
Well, let me just say a little something about that, Robert. I know that we have put out as part of our ongoing reporting an update of the litigation. And I counted, if you count the individual churches in Virginia and in Pittsburgh, I counted 107 lawsuits that the Episcopal Church and or the diocese in which those churches were located, churches that left the Episcopal Church as a matter of conscience over doctrine and over failure to follow the Bible on the Lordship of Jesus Christ and matters of human sexuality. 107 lawsuits that the Episcopal Church and its diocese have initiated against these congregations. We're, I think, going to make that available. And the really sad thing is that the Episcopal bishops even lied about this at Lambeth and said that the congregations that left started the lawsuits, and that's just simply not true, and we document that. We thank Alan Haley for updating the list.
Now I think that was just some of the bishops at Lambeth. It wasn't like all of them were talking about it.
No, but we do have a report there from an English bishop who said that it was the American bishops who said this at Lambeth.
Okay. So, according to our count, 107 churches are currently being sued or have ever been sued, or what does that 107 represent? The
107 represents all that have ever been sued. Many of them are still active.
Okay. What are the possible ramifications of the particular case in Savannah?
Well, here's the real issue. The real issue is that Christ Church Savannah is a church that received its land without any grant or giving from the Episcopal Church. It's very, very clear. And so on the facts, on the merits, it's a strong case under a what we believe to be an appropriate neutral principles analysis. looking at what the court said, and I have the quote right here from Jones versus Wolf, which is the last major church property case, which incidentally came out of Georgia. Under Jones, neutral principles ought to be objective, well-established concepts of trust and property law familiar to lawyers and judges, and, in another quote, developed for use in all property disputes. And that's at 443 U.S. at 599 and page 603. Now, what does that mean? Breaking that down into lay terms, it means that in church property cases, you look at things that don't have to do with religion, because the court doesn't want to get entangled in religion. It just wants to see the facts. What do the deeds say? What are the instruments of conveyance? The bylaws, quitclaim deeds, where did the money go? They don't want to have to, at least we believe, on a fair reading of Jones versus Wolf, they don't want to have to entangle themselves in matters of church doctrine. Was the church right? Was it wrong? But, you know, how are church property cases normally settled? And the problem here, and what many state Supreme Courts are doing, with the exception of South Carolina and Arkansas, what many of them are doing, you see, is they're saying, well, if the church passes an internal law and says we have a trust, unilaterally, we've decided we have a trust in this property, notwithstanding the deeds and the instruments and the conveyances and where the money flowed, but we have a property ownership. And it doesn't even matter that we didn't notify each individual church, it's just we passed this at convention. Then that factor trumps all the other factors. We believe that's a terrible misreading of Jones versus Wolf. And the reason why this is a significant case is that Jones versus Wolf and Hull versus Presbyterian are two major U.S. Supreme Court church property dispute cases that also come out of Georgia.
So you think this particular case in Savannah is ripe to move forward to the Supreme Court level of the United States and could maybe, resolve all of these issues?
I do. I do. I think it could. And here's the thinking. And again, to sort of break it down into lay terms. It's the Dennis Canon that's at issue, that church law that says the Episcopal Church has a property interest in all of your churches. And especially the churches, of course, that left and became Anglican. It kind of works this way. It's like if you were a member of a homeowners association and you went to a meeting on December 31 and at about 11:59 everybody files out, happy with everything that was decided about lawn care and gardens and upkeep and maintenance. And then as everybody was filing out, at 11:59, the board of the homeowners association said, oh, by the way, let's pass a law right now. If anyone leaves the neighborhood, that's fine, but their house stays with us. That's what the Episcopal Church did with the Dennis Canon. And the way that the state courts are, again, with the exception of South Carolina and Arkansas, are using this against Anglicans who are in litigation with the Episcopal Church is they're saying, well, notwithstanding all of that that you have that shows, like Christ Church, that you got your property even before the denomination existed, and it's always been in your name, and the money has always flowed from you to the diocese because they passed that law.
They own it.
They own it. And that raises a very troubling constitutional issue under the Establishment Clause, because basically what the courts are saying is, oh, Episcopal Church, we're not going to inquire into whether that law was passed validly. We're actually going to exempt you, in fact, from everybody else's requirement to obey conventional rules of trust law, property law, corporate law, and we're going to carve out a special exception for you. That's a violation of the Establishment Clause. It's preferring somebody over another, and why should the Episcopal Church be preferred over Walmart or, IBM?
Now, we've got to recognize, and I know that we've heard this here at the AAC, that many Christians, Anglican and other denominations, think there is a scriptural basis for not going to court against fellow Christians or against non-Christians. Right. And we've also met with many people that think it's okay, that despite the chapters and the verses, and I think Matthew and 1 Corinthians specifically, that it's all right at certain times to engage in lawsuits. How do they, those that choose to engage in lawsuits, settle that with what the Scriptures say?
Robert, that is such a good question. And, I work with attorneys who are defending formerly Episcopal churches, now Anglican, that are in litigation. I work with people who've left their buildings behind and are starting new congregations and warehouses and gyms and cafeterias. So I understand both sides of the argument, and I'm not here to stake out a particular position on behalf of the AAC or anybody else. I guess I see it this way. On the one hand, people who don't believe that you should be in court at all have taken a very conscientious look at Matthew 5:40, where Jesus said, if someone sues you and wants your cloak, give it to them. And 1 Corinthians 6, where Paul talks about the shame and the dishonor when brothers in Christ sue each other in court. And many Christians have left their buildings behind for this very reason and found great blessing. And we've got stories of people who've prospered by leaving their churches behind. And the other advantage is, when you're not in litigation, you can focus entirely on mission. Your resources go towards evangelism and discipleship and reaching your community, and you're not looking in the rearview mirror. On the other hand, are those who take a look at Paul in the New Testament, in Acts 16, where after he was falsely and unjustly jailed, Paul appealed to the authorities and asserted his Roman citizenship.
Appealed to Caesar.
And then in Acts 20, when he appealed to Caesar before Festus and Felix. And that they're simply exercising their rights, as Paul did, against a very similar kind of persecution and even threat of extinction. And the stakes are very high because in this particular case of Christ Church, as well as the Bishop Seabury Church up in Connecticut, the rulings of these courts have implications not only for Anglicans, but for Presbyterians, Baptists, Assembly of God, and all other denominations. It's possible, the way the courts are ruling, that your Baptist church or your Baptist convention, as unlikely as it might seem, could decide in 10, 20, 50 years that they're going to abandon the faith once delivered that you believed in and pass a church law like the Episcopal Church did and take all the congregation's property. And so the question is, do you litigate it 50 years from now, or do you litigate it now when the issues are ripe?
Or if you take the other side, do you even litigate it all?
Or do you even litigate it all? Do you just cut your losses and say, look, we've done what we can. We want to focus on mission. We don't want to be looking in the rearview mirror anymore. We want to just get on with it.
So clearly the people at Christ Church Savannah, and I think there's also another church in Connecticut, and churches, right. For instance, just down the road from my house in McDonough, Georgia, is Timber Ridge Presbyterian Church that actually is taking a similar case that they're having with their local presbytery up to the United States Supreme Court.
That's right.
They all have very tough decisions
yes.
to make. What can we do to help them?
Well, I think that the number one best thing we can do, Robert, is to pray for them, because it is a very difficult decision. Biblically, it's a difficult decision. Missionally, it's a difficult decision. Financially, it's a terrible, terrible strain that these congregations like Christ Church Savannah and Bishop Seabury have to look at. They're going to need our prayers that they would be able to listen clearly to the Lord and get their direction from Him about what to do next. I think we ought to be praying, let's say, for Christ Church Savannah, because they've walked out of their building now. They're meeting at the Independent Presbyterian Church. We ought to pray that God would bless them. We ought to pray that God would help them focus anew on sharing His transforming love of Jesus to the people of Savannah and bless them. I know that both Christ Church Savannah and Bishop Seabury up in Connecticut have some deadlines in early 2012 to observe in terms of filing petition for certiorari with the U.S. Supreme Court. So we ought to, again, just be praying for guidance on what they ought to do next. And whatever decision they make, I think it's incumbent upon us to pray that the Lord will continue to guide them and prosper them.
Well, thank you, Phil, for your time. Friends, thank you for watching. I know it's not a fun topic to think about or hear about, but it's something that we do need to pray about, and pray that our brothers and sisters in Christ do the Lord's will, and whatever happens, happens, and it's all in His hands. Thank you for watching. God bless.